Kapelos. Welcome to all our viewers across the province. We're here for our annual year-end interview with the Premier. And for the first time, that Premier is a woman. Now, with both a budget and an election looming, there's no shortage of politics to discuss. But first, we're going to take a look at Alison Redford's personal life. That'll be up right after the break. Please stay tuned. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us. We're now joined by Premier Alison Redford. Thank you so much for
Thanks
being
for
here.
having
we
me.
Appreciate it. Let's start off just by looking back over the past 3 months about now. You've been in office for that long time, not very long. Has anything come as a surprise to you? Is it what you'd expected?
I don't think it could ever be what a person might expect it to be. It's a really unique job to be Premier of this province. I presume to be Premier of any province, but this is the only one I know. It's busy. There's a lot of time that I spend with my cabinet ministers and my caucus. It's exciting. There's so much opportunity to really touch a number of issues and to be sensible about how we proceed. It surprises me how quickly we can do things. Because I would say that for the 3 years that I was in government before as Justice Minister, it was a different system of doing things in government, and it took a very long time to move things through. We have a cabinet now that's pretty excited about being innovative and being forward-thinking, and so that's been very exciting. I think the other thing that surprises me is how many Albertans will call to talk or will talk to the Premier. And really, it's such a privilege to have people confide in the Premier about issues that are going on in their life or concerns that they have. So it's been quite different from that perspective for me.
So on the topic of those Albertans that are calling in, a lot of them will be sitting home watching this, and I'm wondering, they've heard a lot about your policies and what you stand for, as far as politically goes, but what about you as a person? What do you think they might not know about you?
That I love my daughter. That I love my daughter to the point where everything I decide in my life is based on how it will impact her. So the decision to go into politics, the decision to run for leader, was always very much informed by whether or not I thought that I could do all of that I could continue to be a mom and go to synchronized swimming meets and make sure that I was there for the Christmas concerts and also do the other work. And so for me, it's important. I would like Albertans to know that as I go about my daily life, that I think I am probably very similar to a lot of people in this province who are just juggling everything that they do as a normal part of life.
So have you found it a challenge to try and juggle all of that? Because a lot of us sit back and watch you go from Calgary, Edmonton, all over the place, and you're everywhere, and it's a juggle for any parent. How have you adjusted your life, or how have you managed to do that?
Well, I think that's the key, is it is a juggle for any parent. And I've got a lot of friends that have kids, and they're busy at work, and their husbands are busy at work, and they're still trying to find time to make homemade bread every once in a while and do Christmas baking, and we just do it. And I happen to have this particular job, and there's a lot of travel involved in it. There's a lot of people in this province that are traveling and commuting and just managing everything. And I think at the end of the day, what Albertans think about when they wake up in the morning, an awful lot of Albertans, is will the future for their children and for their parents be a future that they can have confidence in? So when I wake up in the morning, I think about those things, and then I think about what kind of a Premier I want to be. And I want to be a Premier that Albertans can have confidence in, believing that that's exactly what I want, not just for my family, but for every family in the province.
What does your daughter think of you being a Premier?
Well, her life is pretty much carried on. She's gone to the same school for 6 years, and she's involved in sports, and we have a great group of family friends. And every once in a while, she'll do things with me as Premier. She kind of likes to watch me on the news every once in a while. Maybe today we'll be watching this on the news. I don't know. But she watches it as a bit of a curiosity. But she does say to me, and I think this is great, that it's important for mums to work, that it's important for us to see people being busy, and I think she's proud of me, but she also wants me to be at home decorating the Christmas tree and making sure that I'm going on play dates with her friends, and she keeps me honest.
You mentioned also that you thought of her when you decided to run for the PC leadership. I'm wondering what else was on your mind. What sort of clicked when Ed Stelmach stepped down at the end of January that made you decide to run?
I remembered growing up in Alberta, and I remember in high school being a recipient of the Alexander Redford Scholarship and the Louise McKinney Scholarship, which were part of the Alberta Heritage Scholarship Fund. And I remember my parents and my grandparents having a tremendous confidence in the future of the province and a bit of a sense that the province was in good hands, that there was a path forward, that we could rely on the people that we'd elected to define a future that we could be proud of, that we knew that our kids were going to have opportunities, get a good education, and that we were benefiting as Albertans from the resources that we had. And I wanted Albertans to feel like that again. And I thought, I didn't know if I was the one who could do it, but I wanted to be able to talk about that conversation and to be able to introduce that again as a value, because I think Albertans are very proud of where they're from, and they're very strong supporters of community. They want to be proud Canadians, and they want to have confidence in the future. And I feel like the last 3 or 4 years, we've become bogged down in questioning absolutely everything, undermining some of our regulatory institutions, becoming cynical about what political aspirations can be, what we want our province to look like. And I just wanted us to be able to think about whether or not that was a direction that we could take. The other thing was that I also knew that the Alberta that I grew up in isn't the Alberta of today, and that we're now 3.5 million people, and that we have really hopeful aspirations for the future. And we're proud of the fact not only that we have families that have lived here for generations, but that we have new families that have come here to build a life, and that it was important for us as Albertans to be able to have a government and to be a community that understands what those opportunities were and to embrace that change. And so those two pieces played together for me, and I thought that's what I want to talk about in the campaign.
So you talked a lot about that. Did you think when you decided to run that you would win?
I hoped that I would win. I did not presume that I would win, and there were many points over the 8 months where I was certain that I wasn't going to win.
Really?
But I knew that regardless of that, the great thing about a political process is that you bring your ideas to the table. And if you bring your ideas to the table and you get enough support, then you have an opportunity as leader to implement those ideas. But if not, you've at least changed the political conversation.
Definitely. I remember after you were sworn in, I got to interview your dad, and he said, yes, and he said, I asked him, how do you feel today? And he was very matter of fact, and he said, well, Alison doesn't make mistakes, and this is what we expected.
He didn't say that to me in grade 10.
He said sort of, this is the next step. Like it was, very logical to him that this would be the next step. Have you always thought of this as a next step for you? And did you always picture yourself in something like this? And
no.
Do you never make mistakes?
No, I always make mistakes. And I'm sure that in the next 6 or 7 months, there'll be lots of people who tell me about lots of mistakes that I make. And you know what? People do make mistakes. That's life. And the important part is to own up to them. I love my mom and dad. My dad is not one to mince his words. He's someone who always had very high expectations for me. My big joke always was, why did I become a lawyer? Because my father wanted me to become a lawyer. He always would tell me what he believed I was capable of. We never used to talk about this. We've never had a discussion about what my political plans might be, but I'll tell you, he's always been an amazing supporter and great grandpa and a good sign chairman, and it's just nice to know you have people like that in your corner.
Definitely. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. And we'll be right back in just a few minutes more with the Premier after the break. Welcome back. Thanks again for joining us. We'll get right into some of the more political aspects of what's happened over the last 3 months. Lots of major pieces of legislation, new drunk driving, fixed election dates,
Health Quality Council of Alberta Act. Why so much and so fast?
I wanted to set a tone around how I thought government could lead differently. And so when I think about a lot of the legislation that we passed in the fall, it was to give Albertans a sense of confidence around transparency, reflecting what Albertans expect from government, whether it's an independent child and youth advocate or having some certainty around when elections can happen, so that there was not the opportunity to criticize the institutions of government or the institutions of the legislature in a way that would take away Alberta's confidence in the way that our world is organized. You know, I think we have tremendous institutions in this province, from our regulatory agencies to our courts to our legislature, and it's important to respect those institutions because Albertans have worked very hard and Canadians have worked very hard to make sure that those have integrity. And I wanted to make sure that what we were doing was strengthening the underlying foundation of those so that we could actually do what we need to do in government, and that's provide public service to Albertans.
Your opponents, though, say that, you know, the way that you went about getting the legislation through is in some ways undemocratic. Why is it not, if that's what you say?
Well, I think that speaks a little bit to the answer that I just gave. I mean, let's remember that we have a parliamentary system. We have a government that got elected. The leader of the party in power is the Premier of the province, and that government is elected to lead and to set a tone and to set a plan. And we go to the legislature to debate public policy, and at the end of the day, we as a governing party pass legislation that we believe reflects the values of Albertans. And then every 4 years, under the new legislation, we go to the polls and we say to Albertans, did we earn your trust? And that's the time when Albertans get to decide. So I'm not surprised that there's lots of political partisanship. I'm not surprised, particularly as we lead up to an election, that we see some of that. But at the end of the day, the way the system works is Albertans elected a government and they ask that party to govern. And that's what we're going to do.
You spoke just now about setting a tone as well. When you look at Alberta setting a tone, you know, internationally, nationally, you've spoken a lot about sort of changing the way the conversation happens about the oil sands, let's say. You know, the European Union is set soon to vote on an item that would potentially label our oil dirty oil. Mm-hmm. Can you explain to our viewers and to me, I guess, you know, specifically how we repair the damage our reputation has taken?
We understand when these decisions get made that they matter, and we need to understand well ahead of time when these decisions will get made. The Fuel Quality Directive in Europe is still an opportunity for us to be involved in changing what members of the community might decide on that. But in order to do that, we have to be prepared months ahead of time, sometimes years ahead of time, to anticipate what developments will arise that could impact our profile. But the other thing we have to do as Albertans is we have to keep striving to do better, because we've done very well with respect to environmental stewardship, whether it's that we have a price on carbon or we invest in new technologies, the fact that we've been able to lower our carbon emissions, our carbon footprint, that we're supporting new technologies that will continue to do that. We've got to be proud of that. We have to talk about that. And then we have to talk about what the economic impact is of not getting oil from the oil sands. And those are all part of a real conversation, but it's not a communication strategy. It's got to be something where we as ministers and premiers, me in particular, are building relationships with people that are making those decisions, because those decisions will have an economic impact on their countries as well. And part of what has to happen is there has to be a real conversation where decision makers can feel that we're trusted partners in trying to achieve the same outcomes. We're not on different sides of the debate. But it's a matter of having people that are making some of those decisions understand what we have done and what we're continuing to be committed to doing in terms of environmental stewardship, so that we can all benefit from the fact that these resources are here.
So who do you approach to tell that story? Who do you have that conversation with?
It's leadership at a number of levels, and it's leadership in European capitals, in Asian capitals. It's a number of people who are congressional leaders in the United States. It's also part of the major city mayors caucus in the United States. It's people who represent communities that will be impacted by adverse decisions with respect to the oil sands. But, you know, one of the things that we haven't done very well in this province is understood how complicated these conversations are. I remember 3 years ago debating whether or not we should have representation at Copenhagen. It's ridiculous. Of course we needed to have representation there. We needed to do more than have representation there. We needed to be part of the pre-conference planning for a good 12 months so that we were building trusted relationships with the people that would set the agenda. And that's what Alberta needs to do now, is to have a role internationally that really reflects the importance of our resources and our political leadership in a number of those policy debates. We did much better at Durban in terms of being prepared for what would happen, working with the Canadian delegation, working with the Quebec delegation. And we'll continue to do that. We've had Cal Dallas, our Minister of International Affairs, at the Doha round. What we're seeing is that when we're at the table talking about what our record has been and understanding that these decisions aren't made in the last 2 hours of a conference, that we can have a greater policy impact, and that's important for us.
On the topic of our resources, net migration here is very high from other provinces. Recently, new economic reports are saying that the labor shortage here will be bigger than anticipated, already estimated fairly high. How do we combat that labor shortage and help out a lot of the companies that are pushing our economy at this point?
Some of these issues are short-term and some of them are long-term. The short-term issues or short-term solutions are solutions we need to work with the federal government on, and we've already started doing that in terms of ensuring that we're reducing the administrative burden on the provincial nominee program and the temporary foreign workers program in terms of the paperwork that needs to be put in place. Short term, we also need to attract more Canadians from other parts of the country. And that's about building community and talking about who we are in a way that people want to move here. But it's also about working with the federal government to see if there are ways that we can create incentives that might allow people to make decisions to come here. We're also starting to talk to industry about that because industry wants help from the government of Alberta in recruiting people from different parts of the country, and we're going to do that. Longer term, it's education, and it's about educating people in our own province with the skills that they need to have to participate in the economy. And that's not always university degrees. That's asking people to think about going into technical programs, developing trades, and knowing that those are really valid career choices that are going to allow people to live a great quality of life. But all three of those together are approaches that are going to allow us to get this done. And we've been working very well with the federal government on this. We're also doing some work with the U.S. Ambassador to Canada, Ambassador Jacobson, Ambassador Dewar, our ambassador in Washington, to see if we might be able to develop some pilot projects that will allow for more cross-border movement a lot faster.
How do you get people, once they move here, to stay here, though? I've heard you talk about it many times, but I wonder, as someone who has moved here, how do you get people to stay?
Well, that has to be about the communities that we have here. We want everyone to come here, but we want people, once they come, to know that they want to stay because they're investing in their future and their children's future. That's about having strong cities with vibrant arts, culture, a strong education system, a good healthcare system, where we're actually saying to people, if you come here, you will be enhancing your quality of life. And that's going to be important. It's even things like transportation links, making sure that we have the right air travel and the right air connections between Eastern Canada and Alberta, but also between Alberta and the United States or Asia or Europe. All of those pieces together allow us to become a more international community and also a more national community, so that we're actually saying to people, if you move to Alberta, you're not somehow severing the links in your life. Come here, live a good quality of life. Have your family come, visit your friends, but know that you will have an enriched quality of life for your children as well.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit to the budget. You've mentioned that the upcoming budget will be a tough one and a challenging one, as has your finance minister. I'm wondering, throughout those budget consultations, what we've heard from you guys about what you heard is that they still want spending in certain key areas of, they still value that. So how are you, what are you going to cut in order to keep spending in those key areas?
Well, as we go through our budget process, what we're seeing is a picture that's going to allow us, if we make the right value choices, to continue supporting programs that are going to ensure that Albertans continue to have a high quality of life. One of the things that Albertans have said very clearly, and it's not just in the last 2 months of budget consultations, but I heard it over the past year, was we don't want a government that's going to come in and basically slash and burn for the sake of balancing the budget in the way that we saw in the 1990s. That we're a much more sophisticated community than that. That what we want is government that's going to invest for the long term, so that we have sustainable education and we have sustainable health care, so that our infrastructure is continuing to grow, and that we're setting a course for the future that conveys not just to Albertans, but to everyone a sense of confidence. So as we move into the budget, and I said this in my very first speech in the legislature in October, we anticipate that we will have a balanced budget next year, but there will be a deficit with respect to infrastructure spending. So we will be able, in our budget, to ensure that we're still providing services, that we're still investing in infrastructure, and to know that we will have a slight deficit with respect to infrastructure that will be balanced by the Sustainability Fund. You know, in the international climate, that's an amazing accomplishment. We will not have debt in this province still, even though we're seeing economies around the world collapsing. We are going to be able to move through this. And one of the greatest risks is that we decide that the way to move ahead is to pull back on those social services. Because at the end of the day, the result of that is far more detrimental to building community and confidence and a sense of future than moving ahead. But we're still committed, as I said about 2 months ago, to balancing in 12-13. And we're well on track to do that.
Very quickly, maybe I'll just throw in a final question. You spoke a lot about change throughout your campaign over the past 3 months. How is this government, succinctly, I guess, going to be different than the past 40 years?
Well, we already are. We have a new cabinet. We have new senior leadership in the public service. We are responding to Albertans. We're thinking differently about the future. We're going to be bold and assertive, and we're going to have a different profile in Canada and around the world. We understand that the way that Alberta will succeed is to integrate our thinking and to integrate our planning. We've begun to do that, and we'll continue to do that. And I think that's the confidence that Albertans can have in us that will allow us to earn the trust that we need to earn in the future.
Great. So thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Well, it was a pleasure to be here, and Happy New Year.
You too. Merry Christmas to you and your family, and Merry Christmas to all of you and your families. Happy New Year. Thanks for joining us.